Perfect. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar, Confronting the Challenges of Digital Transformation. Thanks for joining our webinar series. Maybe there are some people that have been already visiting one of our other webinars. And maybe just quickly before I get to our great guests that we have today, just quickly about myself. I'm Jörg Niesing. I'm a professor of marketing at INSEAD, and all my work, my research is focusing on this triangle: digital transformation, data analytics, and customer centricity. I'm the program director of the open enrollment programs B2B marketing strategies and leading digital marketing strategy. Before INSEAD, some people say, I also had a real job, right? So I spent over 15 years in the business world as well. And yeah, just recently last year, I published with Fred, who is here today as well, our latest book, The Definitive Guide to B2B Digital Transformation: How to Drive Uncommon Growth by Prioritizing Customers over Technology. And it's my pleasure to moderate this webinar today. Just quickly here, before I introduce my guests, the webinar etiquette, and before more people are joining, some housekeeping rules. Please keep the questions coming by using the Q&A function. The chat is disabled, and we are also recording the webinar, as many of you will most likely access this at a later stage as well. The agenda for today, very simple. We have around 4 content blocks, and after 2 content blocks, we will address a few questions from the audience, and then we also will keep enough time at the end of the webinar for the remaining questions. So I'm joined today by 3 fantastic experts. So let me maybe start with Heather. Heather Tiltgen, let me introduce you. Heather, thanks for joining us. Welcome.
Thank you.
Heather Tiltgen is the president of Boston Medical Center, which is a not-for-profit managed care organization with more than 430,000 members and $3 billion in US dollar in revenues. Heather joined as the president around 18 months ago and is responsible for developing and implementing the enterprise strategy, vision, and the goals to drive profitability and improve their members' health and lives. Before, she held various senior executive positions, including 8 years as a senior vice president at Medical Mutual and 5 years as the vice president consumer marketing at CUNA Mutual Group. Heather holds a Bachelor of Arts from the University of Texas and an MBA from the Vanderbilt University. Thanks for joining us, Heather. Great to have you. Then we have René Steenvoorden, is a member of the executive board of Randstad since March 2020. And Randstad is, as many of you most likely know, you might be a customer, is a global leader in the HR services industry and specialized in solutions in the field of flexible work and HR services. With 21 billion in revenue and offices in 38 markets, it employs 568,000 people every day around the world. René has been the Chief Digital Officer for Randstad since September 2016 and is leading the development of Randstad's digital strategy and its implementation across the group. He's also the Chief Information Officer and so responsible for all the IT, which will be most likely an important topic in today's session as well. And prior to joining Randstad, René was the CIO at Rabobank, where he was responsible for IT, global innovation, and large digital transformation programs. And he also had hold various positions at Essen, McKinsey, and Procter & Gamble. Thanks a lot, René, for joining. Very good to have you. Thanks for taking the time. Then last but not least, Fred Geyer, as said, the co-author. We wrote together the book. Some of you have seen him in previous webinars. So he's a senior partner at Profit, a global consulting firm focusing on growth strategies, and he helps major insurance, healthcare, and technology companies accelerate growth by becoming more relevant to their customers in a changing world. Fred focuses is transforming brands to become more customer-centric and more effective users of digital technology but also data. He works with clients like J&J, Electrolux, Lilly, Medtronic, Avery Dennison. So you see, he brings a fantastic B2B experience as well. He holds an AB from Harvard and an MBA from Columbia Business School. Thanks for joining, Fred. Thanks to all three of you to have you here. Before we start jumping right into it, I just wanted to quickly here, 2 minutes, set the stage, because in our Leaders series, we want to address challenges, but also opportunities companies are facing when it comes to digital strategy, customer-centric strategies, but also digital transformation. But what we realized in our research is that many leaders, they struggle with this word digital transformation, right? And I personally hate that term as well. I'm always asking myself, shouldn't it be transformation in a digital world? But when Fred and I wrote the book, we realized in our research and interviews with thousands of executives that winning organizations focus on 3 transformational shifts. And these 3 shifts we summarized in the digital selling shift, which is sell more, meaning how can you leverage digital technology and how can you leverage data to engage with your customers in more powerful new ways. In B2B, this also means integrating sales and marketing more efficiently. Right. The second shift, the digital experience makeover, here we are moving away from engagement to creating better customer experiences. So how can I leverage digital technologies and data to transform experiences by making them more tailored, dynamic, and easy to use, and thus more relevant for customers? And then last but not least, the digital proposition pivot. So this is about selling new. Right? So you're thinking about new revenue streams, and this shift is about pivoting from product-centric propositions to customer-centric data-driven propositions. I'm pretty sure many of you here, many people from the audience face similar issues. I mean, we talk about energy companies selling less energy, the energy will be free, right? But what they are charging you is the energy that they help you to save, right? You know about elevator companies that say, I give you the elevator for free, I'm charging you for the meters, the elevator goes up and down. So we talk about new business models, new solutions driven by data and technology. And that's also what we want to address today a little bit. And Renee and Heather and Fred are dealing with these issues firsthand, and it's great to hear how you are dealing with these new challenges that you are facing. And just here to really summarize it, what we saw in our research, and it's then good to have experts like you really talking about it, when it comes to the execution of this, we call it the body, mind, soul framework. The execution of a successful digital strategy requires the right people, the right mindset, the right body, meaning the right infrastructure, processes, tools, but also the right soul, the right values, the right symbols. But again, that's what we realized in academic research. So let's dive finally into what the experts say that are dealing with these problems for decades. So before we do so, I wanted to ask Angela to start a little poll here for the audience, because I would like to learn from you, what are your main digital challenges that you are facing in your organizations? Right, so we're giving you a little list here. You can select up to 3, whether it's related to the culture, whether it's related to the business model, inefficient customer centricity, measuring the ROI, empowering employees, lack of strategy. So I give you a few seconds here to answer this. And then we will have our panel addressing this as well. Hopefully I didn't bias you with my little introduction here. So while the answers are coming in, so we are at 80%. So let's end the polling, and maybe not a big surprise, building the right transformation culture. It looks like, by the way, there's a good mix across all of these. Interestingly, the technology infrastructure is the lowest, so we will go back to this, but the right transformation culture, legacy business model, customer centricity, and expertise in leading are the most important challenges. So yeah, let me maybe ask you guys here, Heather, Renee, let's maybe start with you. I mean, you are both working on this topic of transforming the organizations you're working for. I mean, how do you think about these results? Is this in line with what you are thinking? Heather, why don't you start?
No, when I saw the list originally, I think all of the answers are right because it's contextual to the organization. So for example, started out my career in a company called USAA, which serves the US military and their members, an exceptionally member-centric organization. But what we battled with there was our desire to do things outpaced the technology infrastructure. So for example, we were the first ones to do deposit at home on your phone. Other organizations really had to work hard, run by accountants, right, to clearly articulate the ROI and get accountants to believe in the return and the growth in the business and the growth in the margin relative to big investments, right? These tends to be expensive investments. Today, really focusing on a combination of building the right culture. So I was happy to see the culture pop to the top, combined with a lack of member centricity. So where I work now is a subsidized market. Members are assigned to us. They don't generally pay premiums. So there's been this mindset of, we just need to lower the total cost of care. And so what we're trying to do is help the whole organization and all our stakeholders understand that these two things of managing total cost of care and digital transformation are not only not mutually exclusive, they're complementary, right? The better we can get our members to engage with us, the better we can take care of the whole person and shift from a longitudinal care model from an episodic one.
Yeah, great. Oh, that makes total sense. Renee, I mean, what about Randstad? What about your perspective here?
Yeah, I'm very interested to see the results because they're very in line with what I would have picked myself. Certainly with infrastructure being the least of the worries, I tend to say tech is easy, change is hard. And nowadays building technology is not that hard anymore with all the great low-code efforts and other kinds of capabilities that are available for all of us. But then really using it and creating concrete, tangible and lasting change, that's the very hard part. And I agree very much with Heather. Basically all of these variables are important. You need to get them all right, but it's the change part that always is the top on the list if it gets to the hard. What part is the hardest? Yeah. Just to give you a great example, we created a new system that would allow our consultants to pick far more easy candidates to fit with a job. And we spend a lot of time on customer research. I'm pretty sure we're going to cover that later in the discussion, Jörg. But as the senior management never used that system before themselves, they could not coach the people, and then they sent back the project because they basically tried to revert back to the old situation where they felt more comfortable. And we were very optimistic because we spent all that time in customer research and all the pilot user loved it. Yeah, but we forgot to take along management enough so they would support it too. It's always that part that's the hardest, the people part, I would say.
Maybe here a quick follow-up question, because you are a tech-driven senior executive, responsible for IT. I mean, just for me looking at the results, the budget, only 18%. Is that not low in your perspective? It looks like it's not a big problem, at least for the audience, right?
Well, I'm very interested to hear what the audience thinks, but I think COVID opened the eyes of anybody that might have doubted whether digital was important, yes or no. I think after COVID, everybody understands it, right? You need to be able to work anywhere in the world. You need to be able to work effectively together in hybrid teams. You need to engage sales in a digital way, and therefore your systems need to be in order. And you need to protect yourself against cyber criminals, which is also a very, very tough part of this new digital reality. What I hear from my network and colleagues, and I see in my own situation, investing is not the big problem anymore. But then my colleagues want to see returns for that, and that's the hard part.
Yeah, Fred, anything? I mean, you work with many B2B companies, and you have seen many and talked to many executives. Anything to add from your side?
Yeah, I just think that Renee and Heather are onto it, especially Renee's point about how the conversation has shifted. That COVID, and it was actually already shifting before COVID. COVID just made the shift just happen a lot faster. But I would say in kind of the B2B world, even the B2B, in the multi-stakeholder world, right? Where it had always lagged a little bit, you know, in consumer businesses, you saw transformations really starting to take off more than a decade ago. But these more complex businesses, even before COVID, they were starting to get going. But COVID changed the vocabulary. But they didn't change the problem though. And Renee has his finger on it, because the problem is one of the how to change, and the change is multidimensional. One of the parts is getting used to new technologies. For instance, the example that he gave about adopting a new technology. The other one, though, is the one that Heather got to. Is often this change requires shifting the focus from maybe an operational focus to a much more customer focus, and then not seeing those two things as opposed. That lowering cost is not the enemy of serving the customer better. That digital can do both, but only if there's a focus on the customer. Without it, it just is lowering cost, and then the transformation doesn't take off. And where I've seen that most are in what I would call some traditional businesses like commercial insurance or medical devices that were slow to go, and now in the last year have really picked up in this orientation, both toward digital and toward the customer.
Yeah, maybe you bring up a good point, and let me follow up here on this customer-centric angle. And Renee, you said it earlier as well, the research you're doing, and I know the optimizing the customer experience, the second shift is a big topic for you at Randstad. But back to Fred's point, I mean, you are in this multi-stakeholder complexity where you have various clients and then the talent you recruit, right? So how do you deal with this complexity and the challenges, like making all the stakeholders happy?
Yeah, maybe good for the audience to know, but we're basically B2B and we're B2C, right? Because we need the clients to come up with the job vacancies, and then we need to find the talent that want to work in these jobs, whether that's a temporary job or a fixed job. We do both. So we need to be able to work in both worlds and then connect them. So we're basically a mediator between clients and talents. And that's in a digital age a very tough spot to be, because it's very easy to be disrupted, as we have seen in the travel, music, and in other kinds of sectors. And so you need to add value, and adding value means that you really have to understand deeply what is the pain or the needs that your clients, and in our case the talents, have. What are they struggling with? In our case, a lot of people around the world struggle with staying relevant in their working lives. They all feel threatened by automation. They see huge shifts in the world, economic, social, political, and they all feel insecure. Do I still add value, and how can I provide for my family and develop myself on an ongoing basis? But the clients that we serve have a similar kind of worry. They all understand talent is my biggest success factor. That's very well understood. But you know that talent is nowadays sometimes fixed, sometimes they're temporary, sometimes they leave for a competitor, sometimes you outsource them, but they still are all part of your image. They're all part of your success. Your clients don't care whether people is temporary or fixed, they want to be served, and they all see them as part of your organization. So what we try to do, Jörg, is really add value to both groups on an ongoing and structural basis. We want to be the trusted partner in your working life, basically all of your life, from your very first job to your last job. And as a client, from the very first person you hire to reskilling thousands of people and maybe outplacing them, we're there. And that's the added value add we can bring if we're being very customer centric.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned you talk to many organizations. I mean, do you see, maybe quick follow up here, because I get these questions from students all the time, that the skills and competencies needed are completely changing, or is it sometimes we just talk about it, but same for now, still same competencies as we taught maybe 5 to 10 years back are still the relevant ones?
I guess it's a typical good news, bad news situation. The bad news, if you don't like change, that's unavoidable. So yes, skills will change, jobs will change, and there will be a lot of need for people to augment or change in the way they act. But the good news is there's work enough for everybody. So, and there's various studies, one of them being McKinsey in their analysis, and they predict for most markets even a scarcity while this change is happening. And that has to do with aging, it has to do with migration flows, it has to do with the shift to experience. So people don't want to stand in line to change their bank accounts, so they want to do that online. But if they want to close their first mortgage, they still want to have that personal conversation, and that personal conversation has to be perfect. That experience has to be great. And you need people that be able to handle that. So there's a huge shift of people moving from one way of working to others, while we are still in the old world. So take, for example, COVID. Yes, clearly travel was not the place to be, or the restaurant business. But now we see a lot of people active in e-commerce. And there's huge growth in logistics. So forklift drivers, anybody that has a truck driver or forklift driver, send them our way, and we'll find multiple jobs from them tomorrow. No problem. So just as an example, there's work enough for everybody, but you need to be able or willing to change.
Yeah,
Heather, you have the same multi-stakeholder challenge.
Absolutely.
And also this challenge of changing health dynamic in terms of how the industry is working. Can you talk about what that means for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So you talk about our multiple stakeholders. So we certainly have our members that I talked about, the providers, right? We have to interact with the clinicians that do provide the care, then regulators, a heavily regulated industry. And then we have community social supports that we interact with as well. And this care, overall, the health care delivery system in the US has underinvested in technology, in my opinion, and this care can get pretty disjointed. And when that happens, you don't really get this whole person care. So for example, if someone has a behavioral health issue, they'll be treated by a psychiatrist, but oftentimes that results in a lot of physical health issues. And so coming together to understand that whole person and what things prevent them from getting the care they need. So is it transportation? Is it childcare? Scheduling appointments can be difficult. And so it's a matter of us as an industry really getting more transparency in our data, but then delivering actionable insights to every one of those stakeholders so that we can make better decisions as we care for the members overall.
And I mean, building on this, Heather, maybe we saw it earlier in the poll, right? The legacy business model is a barrier and challenge for many participants, but also we see this in our research, right? It came up in our research as the second most important one, and we know, that the healthcare industry is also heavily impacted by this. I mean, how do you make sure that you keep your business model relevant? I mean, what changes are you proposing?
Yeah, and so really when coming in, like, as you talked about at the beginning, I've been in my job about 18 months. There was just core functions that weren't in place that we needed to invest in, right? And we're calling that brilliant at the basics, but it really is just getting ourselves up to industry standard. But as we think about moving beyond that, we need to really be very crystallized on what our purpose is. What are we here to do? What are we promising the people that we serve? And how are we going to deliver that? And helping employees and our stakeholders understand that more broadly really helps drive that customer-centric strategies of how do we deliver better healthcare, and then how do we go about prioritizing that, right, to those purposes and promises. And we do that largely looking at ROI and what's going to have the biggest impact into the member experience. But it is something that is not a direct path, and something that we're navigating carefully.
Yeah, and René, please.
No, I was just wanted to ask Heather, if you don't mind, Jörg, putting you out of the job. I have a job as a forklift driver, if you want, of course.
Well, I have a teenage son, so I was like thinking of sending him your way, René.
No, that was. I'm sure that you also struggle with the difference between the perception or the needs of the clients. They expect the best experience and kind of services today, and then what you actually can already deliver today. So is it the difference between the vision that you have and the ambition that you have, and then the reality of everyday services? Do you see that back in how clients interact with you, and how do you handle that difference between the vision and the reality?
Yeah, so I think what we have done as an industry is set expectations about how clients expect to interact with us, right? And it's how do we change the game to have a unique value proposition, not only to our core market, but to an expanded target market. And that's where the vision comes in of how can we do things differently. And a big part of that is the digital transformation of understanding the unique situation for each of our members and the pathway that makes sense. And we can't afford to do that on an individual by individual level. So that's where the AI comes in, right? Helping understand who might be in an emerging risk category, that if we can help manage their condition early, it doesn't escalate. So it's that transformation of our customers don't expect things from us that we should be delivering, and we can really differentiate ourselves by doing that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's an interesting comment, because I know, René, at one point some time ago we discussed or we talked about this disruption versus transformation problem, right? Is it you transforming as an organization, you pushing it, and that's why it's a challenge for organizations? Or is it, like Heather, you described, nobody, the disruption itself, coming from competitors, coming from the context, coming from new trends, is really causing the problem? Do you have a view on this, René? Yeah,
I would say in our case, the push really comes from the clients and the talents. So they expect nowadays, a similar kind of experience that you get from Netflix, Uber, Apple, Google. They just don't accept imperfection. They don't accept that if you turn up with an account manager, that account manager doesn't know that somebody else already spoke with them a month ago. But they also, very clearly, if people go to your website to apply for a job, but they get stuck in some kind of very long questionnaire, filling in questions that are relevant for us but not for them, they will just go away and go somewhere else. So it's clearly the disruption coming from expectations from the market. Yeah. It's not so much the disruption that comes from the model. I think we're fortunate because some sectors didn't have time to respond. In our case, we've seen even full digital models and startups after 10 years still not, being extremely disruptive in our market. So that's, I guess it's more luck than anything else. But so it gives us time to act on it. But the pressure is on, given the expectations of clients and talents. Yeah.
I want to build on this idea, though, of this prioritization, right? Because when you're in the world that the pressure is on, the pressure is usually on in a lot of places. And what we see that among our clients, the ones who make the big gains don't try to make big gains every place. what they do is they really pick their places. And interestingly, they pick the portions of the customer base. So they don't try to do big things for every customer. Instead, they move much more faster against individual customer segments and getting momentum on individual wins. And when they do that, then two things happen. One, they see much more immediate return on investment that then feeds the larger corporate world that says, the corporate environment says, well, you know, Renee, you were able to get that gain. Let's give you some more money, right? And you get on this virtual cycle. And then the other one is that focus makes you go faster, right? The minute you stop boiling the ocean, they and it's funny because I just saw a comment in the chat about you know, transformation is often stuck in B2B, and it's often because the companies try to do too much too soon. And if you can really get this momentum going, and I'd be interested in both Renee and Heather, you talking about what does it take to get momentum going, and what are some of the tricks there?
Heather, you want to go first?
Sure, I can. And so, Fred, I think your point about really focused areas is spot on. And so we have, like many organizations, strained, limited resources. And like I said before, that some of these technology investments certainly can be expensive. And so we're looking at things of, okay, what cohort of our members drive the largest expense, and how can we invest in them to lower the expense and have them have better quality outcomes. So here's some examples that we've done, is looking at social determinants of health. So if someone has trouble having housing, right? It's housing insecurity, food insecurity, they're not taking care of the rest of themselves. So we're engaging, investing in solving those problems. You talked about earlier, Renee, COVID, that has certainly forced us in a good way to do things differently, one of which is telehealth. And so where we've seen huge gains in this, and we're investing a lot more in it, is around behavioral health. So any given Tuesday, about 7 out of every 10 patients who are coming for behavioral health appointments didn't show up. But once we moved it to a telehealth model, or telephone in some cases, we have a 90% show rate, right? And so people are getting more of the care that we need. And so thinking about what did we learn in COVID, and how do we continue to utilize that, and then take those wins, to your point, Fred, and then reinvest them after we have those proof points of the return on that technology is there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that's why I really like the book, Fred and Jurke. That's not because we are allowed to be in your panel, but because it gives a far better insights into transformation than your average book. Because transformation in a B2B environment is very complex. Yeah. You need to fix so many things, and you cannot just pick one or two. So you can focus on various segments or clients and make it work there, but in that focus, you still need to cover all of them.
That's right.
And I call that foundations versus early wins. So yes, we need to show early wins so management and people get excited and they see the value and they give you more money and you can scale up. But that only works if below that you fixing the foundations. In my case, our company is 60 years old, but always been very decentral. So there's literally, when I came in 5 years ago, there was no global, effort on digital level what to speak of, and we had to build it from the ground up, and that just takes time. Now we had quick wins, and we did a lot of lean startup, agile kind of approaches, learn, adopt, fail fast, and make it work. But then we also spend a lot of time and money on stuff that nobody sees or appreciates. That's data quality, security, getting my websites improved, SEO, all that kind of stuff that's not very sexy for a salesperson. But if you don't do it, then eventually your transformation will get stuck because your foundations are not solid. Sometimes I compare it to an iceberg, right? People see the shiny stuff on top of above the waterline, but 90% of the work in digital transformation is done below the waterline, and it's not sexy, it's very expensive, and it's slow, but it needs to be done, because if you don't do it, eventually your house will not be solid.
Yeah,
and linked to that point that you just mentioned, Rene, we have this great question here from William about the integration of sales and marketing. Again, the complexity in B2B organizations, right? William is asking, sales is stuck in the dark ages, but marketing has been digital for a number of years, right? And I know you at Randstad, you live this philosophy, tech and touch, right? The complexity of creating powerful omni-channel experiences. William is asking, so how can we move towards an integrated digital selling model? I mean, how, maybe Rene, before Heather, you go next, but Rene, maybe, how do you deal with this at Randstad? Because tech and touch is your philosophy.
Yeah, well, I'm very passionate about it. So thank you, William, for the question, because next to IT, I'm also responsible for marketing and communications in the group. So I'm living this dream every day. And what you find out is, in our case, we're extremely sales oriented, but marketing usually was not that prominent. Once we started to fix that, the first thing we had to fix was data, because marketing was not able to explain the value add. They were not able to show the model, the ROI model between investing in, for example, traffic and SEO and eventually sales. Then you're always a cost bucket, and the cost bucket goes up and down depending on how the economy is doing. So we had to learn the marketing folks to be far more data oriented, and then connect that very clearly to the sales process, show it, and continue to show it fact-based, and that now it starts to run. But eventually, sales and marketing will not save you, indeed, because in our case, it's very much a human factor. Nobody hires somebody he or she never saw, and nobody takes a job, not even a temporary one, if he never visited the company, at least virtually, right? So that touch part still remains important, although it's getting smaller because a lot of things we do digitally. That touch part has to be unique, and that's where marketing and sales also, need to go hand in hand together. That's customer experience has to be a very fulfilling experience. It's less touch, but once it is touch, it has to be great.
Yeah, no, this is great. I mean, here, what I'm hearing is you're also not concerned that you have to lay off half of your sales force. It sounds like it's about efficiency. It's about freeing up time that they can, focus on the more important accounts, maybe.
Yeah, well, and Heather, you have this tech touch thing as well, right?
Yeah, we do, and it ties exactly to what George and Rene are saying around that efficiency model. So you think about health insurance. It's a very complex product set, hard to understand. I've had senior executives retire and come to me and say, hey, Heather, what health insurance plan should I get? And it's like, you've been in this industry for 30 years. And so really helping the consumers understand their options, the cost of them, and getting a qualified lead to the distribution after we've educated the consumer in the first place. Then you see much higher close rates as you pass them off to like a broker or a sales agent, and tying that what we've learned in the digital shopping space to the conversation that most people want to have with a person. Tying that information together really makes for a much more effective and tailored sales process. And we found it to be much more efficient.
Yeah, and it's funny because this is the topic of the book that Jorg and I are working on next, which is called The Digital Selling Shift. And what we've seen is first is that COVID has torn down the first big barrier in these more traditional, we're going to call it sales-oriented companies, right? That it's very much about interpersonal sales, large sales forces, call centers, that type of operation. And the first thing were just habits. People just didn't want to change because they liked being the salesperson or the call center that was the center of attention. But then there were other in B2B, and B2B is where you see a lot of these sales-oriented companies, or B2B and B2C, like your company, Renee, and like your company, Heather. The other two big barriers, though, is availability of data. Unlike consumer markets, the data is not nearly so clean. There are big gaps in it, but that's changing. That's really changing quite quickly. I would say even over the last 5 years, it's remarkably different. And then the other thing is that access to these complex decision makers has also opened up, and methods like account-based marketing have really helped people, and people say account-based marketing. Account-based marketing is really account-based selling, right? To help integrate marketing and sales to work together. And I think the combination of that, growing willingness to change, plus the change in data availability with this growing access is making for the opportunity to change to new sales models. But on the other hand, AI has not gotten so good, and I don't think it's on the horizon for the next 5 years, that it's going to fundamentally take the salesperson and these complex, or technical support person in some cases, out of business. They're really needed in these complex sales. It's just going to be a very different mix of digital tools with interpersonal touch. Right?
Yeah. And maybe building on that point, Fred, maybe it's a good question for Heather and Renee. I mean, you talked about AI. I mean, in my classes, I often try to make it technology agnostic, right? Because technology comes and goes, and companies follow buzzwords and they don't know where to start. I mean, yeah, first question maybe, in your industries, what do you see as the key technologies to focus on? And then maybe back to your earlier point, Renee, you said budget, not necessarily a problem, but leveraging technology in a way that it really creates value. How do you integrate this? So maybe these two questions, I don't know who wants to start, Heather or Renee, but yeah, like what technology do you see in your industries as important, and how do you properly integrate this into your daily work?
Want to start, Renee?
Sure, we flip coins. Yeah. I would say there's a lot of buzzwords, and certainly AI is right up there. I struggle with it because at the end of the day, you know, what's the difference between an algorithm and a set of rules that you use for decision making and AI? It sounds more sexy than it is, and it is also very dependent on the quality of data. For example, in our market, bias, and I'm pretty sure in healthcare it's the same, bias is a big watch out. And if your data is biased, then your algorithm will be biased too, right? So unfortunately for all the technology sellers, the sexy stuff is still website technology, data lakes, taxonomies, that getting your fundamentals straight, digital marketing tools, a proper CRM that's being kept up to date by your people, and a good way to take all these kind of indicators or signals from your marketing websites, your channels, and your salespeople into proactive behavior. That's far more sexy or impactful, I would say, than any kind of algorithm. So that's where we focus still. It's still foundational work, but at a massive scale, it has a lot of bang for the buck, I would say. Maybe that's on the first question, because the other question is more on change management. So let's separate the two, if you're okay with that, Jörg.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Maybe Heather, in your case.
So I agree with everything Renee said. It's the same things that we're focusing on the foundational data, getting the true CRM, and maximizing that capability. As we look forward to how we would use AI, it's integrating things like home monitoring. So smart scales, blood pressure monitoring, knowing when people are taking their medicine, understanding what's going on with their heart, right? And feeding that data into an application that someone could have a very customized view of how to improve their health, right? And interact with us in that way, because a lot of times people are much more comfortable interacting with, you know, a friendly app than they are a healthcare provider, and we'll share more information with that app. And so how do you take the information that we can gather and the technologies combined with what consumers are willing to share via this app to really transform how they live their lives? Now, that is a very much a future state vision, because we are dealing with everything that Renee talked about of building that data foundation.
No, that's a great example, and I agree. People feel comfortable using technology. So, for example, we have a chatbot that allows you to kind of, you know, ask questions about your career, and we will ask you questions, and it will give you options and advice. Kind of like simulation, and you could do this or you could that. Have you thought about this? This is what you earn in certain sectors. That's very, very successful in the markets where we are piloting it. People spend more than 30 minutes on it, which is very high. If you are in the marketing, you know how difficult it is to get anybody to spend 30 minutes on your website. But with the chatbot, they do. And if we make it less complex, they're disappointed, because then they think we are not taking them seriously. So they like the complexity. They like it to be long and personal, but they do expect you then to use the data of the previous chat session, for example, and make it very personal. So I see a lot of interesting ways that people trust technology very more, you know, much more than before. And in our case, you know, similar to your vision, but in our case, that could lead to your personal career advisor that's always there for you, right? Giving you independent advice. If you just think about how you normally would pick your career, most people ask their parents or their friends, and maybe a career counselor if you're lucky enough to have a good one at your school, and then they make a choice, and you know, it's kind of random, right? How you do your career. Can you imagine what the power would be if you would have your personal advisor that knows the whole market, but always gives you the right advice when to switch or when to scale or when to, you know, push back on your salary demands, all that kind of stuff. That, you know, that's beautiful. I can see a lot of that potential, but yeah, fixing the foundations first, unfortunately.
Yeah, and along this idea of foundations, it'd be interesting for Heather and Renee to talk about what we see are some what I would call best practices / fundamentals. One of them is around customer data. And there's a lot of words for this, creating a 360 view, an end-to-end view, a complete view. But there's a real principle that regardless of the technology that you use, that you try to get a connected picture of your customer. Taking little bits that typically are in different parts of the company and connecting it is a real fundamental. And we see companies that as they really make progress on that, it's remarkable what they can then do with it. And then the other thing that we see is, especially for legacy companies, is the more they can move to the cloud or with their data stack, with their customer engagement stack. And customer engagement stack is all the things that essentially help you serve the customer. But the more they can move to the cloud and use, I'm going to call it for rent, other people, the applications, and instead of building applications from scratch, layer on existing applications, the better off they are. I'd be interested if you see those two trends or best practices in what you're doing.
Great. Yeah, Heather.
Yeah.
Heather, go ahead, please.
You know, it's certainly a trend we're seeing, Fred. You know, we certainly suffer from the legacy systems, right? So our claims data is separate from our member data, for example, and trying to integrate that. But then it's the next level of challenge of how do we integrate it with the data from our providers. And they're all at disparate abilities to be able to do those electronic medical records. So we are at the very beginning of that journey, unfortunately, but we do see the power of bringing that together, but we're lagging with respect to that.
Yeah.
Maybe
the
challenge there, sorry?
No, go ahead.
I would say the challenge there is being able to connect various worlds together. I love the low code and environments where you can really quickly create applications. I like APIs where you can easily integrate data from all kinds of sources, and there's lots of public data nowadays that you can use. But you need to be able to translate it back into your world, but also the client's world, right? So in our case, our client, we might call it a digital analyst, and our client might call it a scrum master. And you need to, that translation table between what you call it, what the outside world calls it, and then bringing that back in a customer relevant way. That's a hard. So we call it taxonomies. Goes for jobs, goes for skills, goes for all kinds of definitions. Creating taxonomies that are able to translate in multiple ways how to look at the world. That's a very interesting piece of the puzzle. But if you get that right, you can be, you can have a very nice strategic position.
And maybe for the last 5 minutes here, let's address a couple of questions here coming up. René also linked to your point earlier about change management and culture, right? So we saw it from the audience. One of the big problems was having the right transformation culture. Yeah, maybe question again for all of you here. In particular, how do we ensure that everybody in the organization is comfortable with making these changes, right? It looks like, again, most organizations struggle in particular with this. Maybe Heather, you wanna go first? Like, how do you implement this change?
Yeah, and I think one of the biggest surprises of taking on my role is if I divide up my mind share, the amount of time I think about any given topic, culture dominates that more than any of the other topics. And so what we're working on, like I talked about earlier, is that clear purpose and promise and principles. But then we're looking at 4 major cultural shifts. So one, that we are a company that is just focused on completely subsidized members that the government pays for, to a broader target of people who have to make tough choices financially. We're certainly a very mission-driven organization, but we're not member-centric, and those things are different. And so helping the organization understand that, and that our role isn't just to serve the hospital, because we're part of a big system with a very large safety net hospital, that we can combine as that system to deliver innovative things. So for example, we're looking at how do we innovate around sickle cell? And then we have in our mindset, hey, we just do the best of what we have. We've been underinvested in, of how do we become more data-driven, ROI-driven, and a high-performing culture. And helping people understand those transformations, along with putting in place a core competence around executional excellence. We would have sort of just this hero mentality of, okay, I got to do this. Let me try to figure out how to do it. But how do we drive this transformation in a much more prioritized and structured way is what we spend a lot of time thinking about, of helping us transform from where we are today to where we need to go to differentiate ourselves.
Yeah, no. René, anything from your end?
I think it's a fascinating topic. You can easily spend your third book on it as well. I would say 3 main tips. One is completely agree with Heather. It's all about vision and making it very tangible. The dream, right? Everybody needs to be able to tell them what it is and have that same dream. And then the second one is it has to be holistic. So don't think change only about, okay, now we have to tell them more or we have to give them more training. Change is also means that you are very specific on how it will affect processes, how it will affect reports, compensation, often overlooked, but what you measure is what you get, right? So compensation and measurement schedules are a big part of driving of change. Whether you like it or not, people are very driven by the KPIs you give them. And then thirdly, I would say, make it personal. So I made that mistake in the beginning. In the beginning, I was selling the dream and everybody got excited. But then the reality was that they still had to wait 3 years before they could do anything. And then people, move on to other parts. So we spend a lot of time in researching very specifically what drives customer satisfaction for both clients, talent, and our employees, our colleagues, and then giving those kind of insights back to our individual consultants. And in our case, for example, we have seen that it was not about a faster app. or a better website. It was if you call a candidate and say, look, very sorry, but you didn't get the job, but we'll do our utmost best to get you a new one. You score tremendously high in customer satisfaction, and it only took one call. So making it practical, making it personal, giving them something that they can influence on a daily basis, and then feedback how people react to it. So we send them, satisfaction scores. We send them quotes from happy clients and talents. That's tremendously powerful, far more powerful than anything else you might do, I would say.
Yeah, I like that point, Rene, making it personal, making it practical, because I hear this often in the classroom, right, where people say, yeah, but we have the vision, but nobody is executing it, right? And it sounds like that's maybe the trick, by making it personal, that people start executing it, maybe knowing it still takes quite some time.
And that's also, I think you're part of that, but we're teaching that to our management. They say, do experiments and do them yourselves. It doesn't take a lot of technology to do experiments. With some Excel and some PowerPoint, you can fake a lot of stuff, and just try it out. Use the lean startup methodology with the MVP, the minimal viable product kind of thinking, and just test it out. Because then you're making it personal. Then you learn yourself what works and what doesn't work, and then later on we'll put it in a system and all that stuff.
No, I mean, we're almost running out of time, so maybe just very quickly here. For each of you, this 30-second one advice. Remember the topic of today, how do you confront the challenges of digital transformation? If there's this one advice you would give to the audience, what would it be? Heather, you want to start?
So Rene, you're going to start?
Sure.
I didn't know who you said, George.
I would go back to one of our earlier statements. I said, look, so celebrate success and early wins, but meanwhile, spend most of your time fixing the foundations that you need to make it structural and lasting.
And where I go is I take it all the way back to the beginning, right? We had that list of challenges, and having worked in different organizations, I think it would behoove you to go through and say, okay, within my organization and in my culture, to influence change, what of these is the most important lever so that you can drive change within your cultural context? Because I think a lot of times people don't think enough about how to win within their organizations and what drives decision making.
Yeah. Fred, anything from your end?
Really just seconding what they said, and really this focus on managing the change, and change requires putting in foundations and making gains. And you have to balance both to win.
Oh, great. I mean, thanks. Good note to end on here. Thanks for all your feedback, for all your insights, for the great questions here from the audience. Yeah, looking at the time, we unfortunately have to wrap up, but yeah, we are planning more webinars in our leader series, and of course, feel free to stay connected by also joining our platform that Fred and I launched, where you can see the recordings of the webinar, where you can find articles about the topic of digital transformation, digital strategy. Yeah, exactly, Rene. The time flies. But thanks a lot, Heather, Rene, and Fred for joining us today. And yeah, for the fantastic insights you have provided. I'm sure the audience took away lots of takeaways. And yeah, I can only say until the next time, and stay safe. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.